Hi, my name's Lauren. I'm a second year PPist at St John's.
Hi, my name is Marta, and I'm also a second year PPist at John's, and we're just about to have a tutorial with Dr. Alison Hills on philosophy, and the topic is moral relativism.
I like to look at some of the different views of versions of relativism, and I think this the sort of cultural view and one where it's relative to an individual, and particularly what Harman says, I think, about the relationship between motivation and relativism, because I think that's another argument for relativism that we haven't touched on yet. But both of you, I think, we're sort of assuming that the form of relativism would be that there are truths and ethics that are relative to a sort of cultural framework.
Yeah.
Well, I give a few. I mean, I kind of thought about the individual one. I don't see relative to all individuals, but then quickly kind of dismissed that view in the sense that talking about a very extreme individual who may be not rational or something, but because he's not rational in fact, and because he's got some kind of, he may have some very complex and peculiar spirituality or something that gives him a specific framework. Well, then it seems to me that then a relativity that's to every individual would have to accept his views, which seem very counterintuitive.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't the same thing going to happen if you're relative to culture and you've got a group of people who have crazy views? Or do you think that's less likely or something? Or
I suppose, having a whole, putting it to a whhole group or culture gives it a bit more legitimacy in the sense that a lot of people are following that view, and also
the irrationality could be tackled, because if we assume that we are all rational beings, then one kind of individual's, let's say, mentality would be normalised within a group.
No, I'd like to sort of stick to a bit of why cultures are important. I mean, is it just that if we think of the kind of where we find moral frameworks, it's sort of within a culture. Because I don't really see why the fact that more than one person has the framework makes it more legitimate, or makes it. I mean, so if relativism is right, then there's truth relative to these frameworks. So it seems a bit odd that you would have truth relative to a framework that a few people accept, but not relative to one that only one person accepts. I mean, more people accepting it makes it suddenly there's truth here or something like that. So do you think there's a very strong reason to favour cultural relativism over that for individuals, or perhaps even something broader, like for a society that includes a number of different cultures?
There is a reason why we should prefer society ones over individual ones, because again, as Lawrence said, that individuals can be irrational, and also then we have suddenly thousands of moral frameworks, and that kind of defeats. Again, that stumbles onto the problem we've talked earlier, that we can't condemn theoretically anything because we say, oh well, that's relative to the individual. Well, maybe because, I don't know, it's quite hard to find, but maybe because culture reasons have been there for a while, so that means that with the frameworks that have been there have built up, and then their knowledge have been kind of transformed into their rules. So I don't know how to express it. But for example, when we talked about even Mill utilitarianism, he said that the common morality has been shaped through ages, and then we've ended up at being these rules which kind of tend to agree with throughout the societies. And for example, do not kill is, if you would find it in the vast majority of moral frameworks, and I think that's why we should value culture more, because the frameworks have been in shape and developed throughout.
But why is that a good thing? I mean,
I suppose maybe one of the bases for talking about cultures first is that simply where you find a lot of moral disagreements, and it's one of the justifications for it. And a lot of the moral disagreements you find between cultures seem kind of just acceptable in the sense they're just disagreements because they're just talking about different things. So relativism fits that picture quite nicely, I suppose. Whereas maybe with individuals, there's always, at least there's more of a scare that you can just invent some framework and live in that. But I mean, arguing against that, because I can actually see the point as well. Within a culture you can have very different moral theories and moral frameworks. As in we've seen in ethics, there's the Kantian people, and then there's consequentialists, and And in a way, I mean, in fact, I argue that in my essay that like those can also be considered as two different frameworks. And then, you know, relative to these frameworks, there can be different true values. Yet, obviously, you can have a utilitarian and a consequent and a Kantian in the same culture.